Well, that sure looks a lot better than it did before with all that sawdust packed around it. For anybody that's never installed a battery, first of all, I'm not a professional battery installer, so you can do it however you like. But I always hook the negative up first, and that seems to reduce the amount of arcing that you get when you hook the positive up. One thing I'm going to complain about with Woodmizer sawmills is their paint job. And those of you who have bought new mills, if you haven't found this out, you will. Evidently Woodmizer doesn't use any primer under their paint. I don't see any primer under that paint. And where it's flaked off at, it looks just like it's bare metal, like here on top of the hydraulic box. This looks to be bare metal. I think what they do, they just put one heavy coat of paint on it and let it go. And this is the second Woodmizer sawmill that I've had, and both of them did the same thing. Every time I wash the mill, I lose a little bit of paint. It comes off in flakes, just like that right there. That tells me, right on the back of that, tells me they're not using any primer, because that's rust on the back of that paint. They're either painting the metal when it's rusty, or they're not putting any primer under it, and it's rusting under the paint, because that's what the paint does. It comes off in big flakes. And I did not pressure wash it. You saw me, I was just using a regular water hose with I call it a fireman's nozzle on it. But their paint is not good. Well guys, one thing about me, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess it's who you ask. But I'm a sucker for a good deal. And I think I bought one with this thing right here. I don't know what in the heck this was built for. It's got 4 really heavy casters on it, and I actually bought it for these legs, for these crank legs. They probably need some oil on them, but I thought I could rig up some outriggers that goes on that scissor lift right there. Maybe attach some kind of little servo motor to the top of them or something. But anyway, this thing is built out of 6-inch C-channel, heavy duty. Whatever it was carrying, it had to be heavy. So I ran across a guy the other day who had a bunch of racks and stuff for sale, and I saw this there and I said, "You want to sell that?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "How much you want for it?" He said, "I'll take $100 for it." I nearly broke my wrist trying to get the $100 out of my pocket before he changed his mind, because one of those casters right there, I bet it's $50, every dime of it now. Those legs, those crank down jack legs, whatever you want to call them, they're probably $150 a piece. You'd get quite a bit of money out of the scrap of this thing, as heavy as it is. And what I mean by quite a bit of money, I'd say it's probably 20 bucks, something like that, comparing it to $100. But anyway, I think it's well worth $100. But today, what we're going to use it for, while we're servicing the sawmill, I hate not having some kind of a table to lay my tools on. There's one thing about my place here, my land and my property, my home, there's some kind of a gravitational pull on it, because every time I lay something down, it rolls off onto the ground, and things just have a way of wanting to seem to fall all the time. And I'm being facetious there, being funny, but it sure does seem that way. But anyway, part of the deal, all these racks that I bought from him had a bunch of old plywood on it. So I'm just going to take this piece of plywood that cost me probably nothing in the whole deal. I'm going to make me a temporary table. Look at that. It's even got casters on it where I can roll it around. All right, we're going to get ready to service the old Woodmizer sawmill here. One thing that I always do is when I service, I make me a note right there. And I hate to say it, but I've run this mill a little longer than what it needs to be ran at. So we're at 650 hours basically. I changed it at 434. I like to change my stuff about every 200 hours. So I'm just a little bit over. That's probably not all that big a deal, but I like to run Rotella T5 in all my stuff. For years I run T4. Don't have a problem with T4. It's great oil, but I kind of like the synthetic aspects of T5. It's a blend. You sort of get the best of both worlds. Those of you who don't know, if you only run straight synthetic, eventually you'll start to have oil leaks, and I have had that to happen myself, and I know there's somebody out there who's disagreeing with that. That's fine, that's your opinion, but in my opinion, what's happened to me, you get oil leaks, and the reason why is because on the back of the seals in the engine, conventional oil will allow that engine to build up carbon on the back of the seals, and that carbon helps the seals from leaking. Full synthetic oil is an extremely high detergent oil, and it cleans the engine. If you take the valve cover off of an engine who's been running full synthetic, it's just as clean as the day it was when it was made. But you're going to eventually have some oil leaks, and so anyway, I'm babbling. I'm gonna get started right here and we'll see how it goes. Now, when I bought the sawmill, it had a little drain plug over there on the side, but it was not this long, and it was extremely aggravating. You had to get over there and take the cap off. Oil would be going everywhere. So I added this hose to it to make things a little bit easier. Plus, it keeps it a lot cleaner. Now, one thing I did not mention, I ran the engine and got it up to temperature before draining the oil out of it, so the oil is warm. Well, the reason why it's not draining out anymore is because it's needing airflow. I'm gonna go up and open up the oil fill on the engine. I always like to do just a quick glance over the engine, see if there's anything crazy that looks funny. This mill has sat outside its whole life, so it's just now getting in the dry, and I think to have 650 hours on it and set out its whole life, it looks pretty daggone good up here. So that's the way life goes. You got to have one thing to get to another, and I needed a sawmill to build a building, so it took me all this time to get it. See how much dust comes out of this, and that's not bad. I have seen this before. I'll try to find a picture that I took of it one time. But anyway, I'll take that home and blow it out with the air compressor. There ain't much way to get this filter off and not get oil everywhere. It's in a tough place. Luckily, there's not much in it. We're on this side of the engine. Let's go ahead and get the fuel filter. Try to do it with one hand. I'm gonna have to lay the phone down. Now I've got it broke loose. It'll spin right off. That was about $1 worth of fuel. Now this mill's got another fuel filter on it. Actually, it's got two if you really want to get technical. Well, no, it don't. It's got two fuel filters on it, one water separator. If you look up in there, you can see the filter. I changed that during the last service. I think it's fine. We'll drain out some of the water on the water separator. See if we get any water out of it. Looks like clean fuel to me. I try to keep my fuel just as clean as possible. Now while we're servicing the mill, we got a few things we need to repair. This happens when running sawmills, especially the way, comes a gust of wind, especially the way that I do it. I'm having to work by myself. So once I get the log squared up, I'll saw it, just slice it up, leave it on the mill, and then I'll come up with the tractor and pick it up off the mill. If it's long enough, if it's laying on the tow rollers, I will pick the can up of boards, so it makes it a little easier to get the forks under it with the tractor. But sometimes if you're sawing like 8-foot logs or something that's a little short, it will not reach the tow boards. So then you got to kind of be real careful. And right here's something that has happened. I'm not real sure how it happened, because usually when you're pushing in with the forks, you catch something and it's going in that way. This looks like something got caught and went that way. It pulled that rod right there out of the socket and bent this flange here just a little bit. So not a biggie, we can fix that. The most aggravating thing about this whole service job are these. Now, Woodmizer uses pressed in grease fittings. I couldn't tell you how many to fall out. I had a couple to fall out on the loading arms. Had to take the pins out, drill the hole out, tap it for a grease fitting, screw the grease fitting back in. Because what happens when you're putting grease in this thing, if there's any resistance in there, especially if you got a new cordless grease gun like I've got, it will just build up enough pressure and it just pops that grease fitting out, and then it's useless. So I think that's pretty shoddy myself. But anyway, I've got grease fittings. Right here's one that's fell out, and I got one on the other arm up here that fell out last time I serviced this. And I tried to get back in there and drive it in, but there was just no way to get in there. So for the past year, I've been thinking I'm gonna have to take these arms off to get to them. And I was just here looking at it. This arm over here is not that big a deal. Looks like you take this bolt out, the pin that holds it on slides out, take it loose from one of these, and then take it loose right here, this arm. And when you get all that loose, then you can take all this out. And I was going to just drill and tap them all and fix it all while I've got all this apart. That was not the problem. This one over here is the problem. If anybody can see what's going on, the pin is down in there behind the hydraulic box. So to get this pin out, the whole hydraulic box has to come out. Now, I'm sorry, I've done engineering work before. I think I could come up with a better way to fix that, even if you had to drill a hole out here somewhere to access that pin. Then they have to take the whole daggone hydraulic box out of it, because these grease fittings, they haven't been greased for a year. And I know that's bad. I agree, it's terrible. But when you're working and you're sawing lumber and a grease fitting pops out, you just don't have time to stop and fix it right then at that point. So I'm gonna ponder on this overnight and see what happens, so what I can come up with. Check this grease fitting out right here on the turner. Right there. It's pointing down that way. So I guess you're supposed to raise the turner up in order to grease it. But who's gonna do that? I mean, to me, maintenance needs to be done every day. You need to be doing something to it every day. But if you have to grease something and then take time to walk back up to the head and move something and come back, you're spending 45 minutes greasing this machine when it shouldn't only take 10. And I'm in it to maintain my stuff well. I know sometimes it doesn't look like that, but I am. But to do it efficiently and quickly, because time is money. I'm going to re-drill that one too. There's that gravity thing I told you about. Another thing, I can put my bolts and screws when I'm working on something in a pile or put them in a box or somewhere, and I can still lose them. I ain't never figured that out either. Now I just dropped that washer. I'll bring a magnet and get it. There we go. Well, I got this over here on my makeshift table and I was looking at it, and all I can say is wow. Watch this. Can you see that? I think you can see that. And the reason why I'm saying wow, that right there is a welded joint. That weld broke. There is no penetration whatsoever. I mean, look at the weld on it. The weld's beautiful, but it don't hold. The reason why I'm saying wow is this right here. Right here. Tensioning bolt for the log turner. Weld's broke. Stop where you'll set the head down to transport it. Weld's broke here, 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 and here, which it's not really welded in all those locations. And it broke off right here. The LT50 I had did the exact same thing. Weld broke here in all these locations. I welded that back together. Let's stop. The weld that holds that pipe on right there at the bottom broke not once, not twice, 3 times. That's the third one of those that I have put in it. And right now it's holding fine. After the second one, I called Woodmizer and I talked to their quality control manager. I sent them pictures. I've still got the other 2 out in the shed. I can show them to you. I welded one of them back myself. The problem is you really need a jig to weld this, because if you get that tube canted any way on that, this is not going to line up right. But I welded it back and it held fine. But man, at the welds on this sawmill that has broke, it blows me away. And I'm hoping somebody at Woodmizer is watching this, and I don't mean to knock the product. I'm just being honest about it. It's I do saw some big logs. I do saw a lot of logs, but it's not like I'm dropping them on the sawmill. And you hear people talk about pretty welds. That right there, is a pretty weld on that. That's pretty. I agree. It's beautiful. And let's find another one somewhere. Here we go. You know, like that right there. That looks sharp. I agree. That looks pretty. Now let's look at this one. Now I welded that with a stick welder, and I'm not a very good stick welder. But in my opinion, a weld that looks like that, if it's not penetrating and it doesn't hold, I don't care how pretty it is, it's not going to work. It's not going to hold up. And I'd rather have an ugly weld that holds than a pretty weld that don't. And this is something else that I did, and I'm sure everybody out there is going to agree with this. When Woodmizer mounts these taillights, they mount them right here. And every time you roll a log up, it's got a big bell on the end of it. It hits that light and bends it down. So I got tired of mine doing that, so I took the light off. I made it a little bit differently. Welded this angle iron on it, welded it all around, painted it with some paint that was close to it. It's not, but I've got some Woodmizer orange paint. I'm gonna paint it, and I have never had another issue with it. So broken welds, Woodmizer guys, that should not happen on a piece of equipment that costs this much, and I don't understand it. This sawmill was built in 2021, right after COVID, and maybe that's it. But I've had a lot of issues with this sawmill. The welds is just part of it. And like I said, I'm gonna go into all that in another video, and I wasn't really gonna talk about the welds today. But when I took that bracket off and saw that weld is broke, that just brings back bad memories. So I'll have to fix that too. I just got this part off, and you can see the bead of weld right here. It runs, what, 75% around that shaft. Now look at the top of the shaft where that weld was supposed to be. It looks to me like they actually missed the shaft. But I'll fix it. I just hope somebody from Woodmizer's watching. If that was welded properly, you couldn't beat that apart with anything. You would bend this or bend that before it was the weld ever broke. A weld should be stronger than the metal that it's bonding together if it's done correctly. I'll try to shoot some video footage when I fix this. What I'll probably do is come in here and I'm trying to hold this too, is bevel that off all the way around, cut a 45-degree bevel and pull it back down in there, and grind our weld back down smooth, and then do a couple of passes on it, and then it'll be there. All right, I got this part that had the broken weld from Woodmizer prepped and ready to weld. So let's get to it. This just goes to show you how anal I am about some things. I just welded the end of that, and I'm gonna clean it up a little bit with the lathe. We'll see how it turns out. All right, I just cleaned that up a little bit on the lathe, and with a little bit of final grinding, it's ready for some paint. And that's not going to break. It penetrated all the way through, which I've ground it out. You can't see it now, but that will stick with it. I'm telling you, guys, if you're doing this kind of work, a lathe is well worth your investment. Mine's an old one. It's half wore out. Well, really, it's probably 3/4 wore out. And but you can still do pretty good work with it. These rings that's cut, I can't point to it and hold the phone at the same time. Right there. Those rings are cut right there. A lot of that's got to do with the amount of wear that's in the ways on my lathe. It's got about 2 thousandths worth of wear up next to the headstock. Well, you got to double that, so that's 4 thousandths. So even though I was touching off on one side, it was coming out, you know, cutting into the metal a little bit. That's okay. It's not going to fail, and I'll paint it and it'll look fine. Now, before we install that, there's a bolt that goes through right here. I need to put that in. If I don't start painting some of this, my whole mill's going to be nothing but primer, which is better than the paint job that come on it if it was primer. The secret to having any kind of equipment and keeping it nice is keeping it in the dry. I realize that, but when you're starting a business, if you don't have a lot of money to start with or someone who can help you, it's hard. And you just have to do the best you can. So this is my second Woodmizer mill. The first was a LT50, and the paint on it did the same thing. All right, we got that back on. Now, the adjustment for this, it's on a cam right here. It's like an eccentric. And I haven't really figured out yet what that's for, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. I know it's got to do with the tilt. You know, you want these arms to be parallel with the bed frame. So that's what it is. This eccentric turns and it actually lifts, pushes this top back or pulls it forward. So I'm not going to worry with adjusting that right now. I need to bring a straight edge and a square and put a square up here, straight edge on the bed, and I don't have that down here, and I'm at the mill shed obviously, and I'll go get one when I got to go get another tool or something. All right, I'm gonna put the oil filter on, and I apologize. The where it's going is right there, and it's back in there, and it's hard to reach, and there's a lot of hoses in the way, so that's about as good of a shooting angle as I can get. I can't even see it hardly. You sort of just have to feel for it. It's a pistol to get on. This engine is, or this mill is a lot harder to work on than that LT50. And a lot of it's got to do with this energy chain. But there's other things about this mill that's much, much better than the LT52. Now, when I tighten oil filters up, I get my hand just as clean and dry as I can, and I put it on there and I just tighten it up about as tight as I can get it in my hand. Right there. You don't want to put them on with an oil filter wrench because for some reason they get tighter as time goes on. Well, all the oil should be drained out of it. It's been draining for 3 weeks. I'm hoping a bunch of stink bugs hadn't crawled up inside of it. Down here at the log yard last fall, for about 3 days, if you was down here working, you better not open your mouth or you'd have them flying into your mouth. That's how bad it was. But somebody had the bright idea to bring the stink bugs over to eat the wannabe ladybugs. I would much rather have whatever those ladybugs are than the stink bugs. And I hope whoever brought those stink bugs over here, I wish they had to eat every one of them, because they are the most aggravating thing I have ever seen. I got a brand new toolbox up there in the junked up tool shed. If you've seen it in another video, brand new. I pulled a drawer open on it the other day, and it came with drawer liners in it. And the ladybugs had got in there and chewed the drawer liner up. It looked like a rat had been there chewing, but I know it was I'm sorry, not the ladybugs, the stink bugs. I know it was the stink bugs because there was all them little chewing shavings was in there, and there was probably 10 million of those stink bugs. But that's enough of that rant. So we got the oil filter on. I got the cap back on the drain. So let's go back on top and we'll pour the oil in it. This is what I meant by this mill's a lot harder to work on than that LT50 was. The engine has 2 ports where you can put oil in it. One is right here at the fuel pump, which I got a funnel stuck in. It's a black funnel, and it goes all the way up there. The other port is on the top of the engine at the valve cover. Well, for some reason, somebody thought it was a good idea to mount the air filter housing right over that top port. That's where I filled it up. And the LT50 is on that top port. And on this one, you gotta have a really long funnel and get it into the fuel pump housing and climb up there and pour it in from up there. And you gotta pour it real slow. There's only so much it'll run down through that fuel filter housing. I'm sorry, fuel pump housing. I have poured it and it get backed up. You can't see it. And the only way you know that it's backed up, it starts dripping down there. This mill's got a Yanmar engine on it. It's a tier 4 diesel. That means it's got all that California emission crap on it. This one regenerates, but it doesn't use DEF fluid, which is a good thing. Engines that runs that DEF fluid in it is just trouble eventually. My LT50 had a tier 3 Yanmar on it, so it didn't have none of this liquor looking steel thing on top. My grandpa used to make white liquor. He could have probably made it in that thing there, which is the burner. After so long, when it regenerates, this thing gets really hot and burns the soot out of it, and it'll just smoke like a freight train. And I'm sitting there thinking, what's the difference in this thing burning it off now and smoking like crazy than just letting it run all the time and smoking a little all the time? I mean, it's the same difference. And eventually this will probably give trouble. There's a lot of people out there that's figured out how to delete them, and I'll probably be one of them to delete this. Now, I said a few minutes ago that the air filter housing was over that oil port. It's not. It's this regenerating canister. It's right over the oil port. But if you deleted that, if you didn't have some kind of a software to load onto the computer, into the ECU, it'd probably throw codes, well, probably wouldn't even run. But anyway, these Yanmars are good engines. I've had 2 of them. That LT50 I had 1,000 hours on it when I sold it. And nothing, not a single issue with the engine. I haven't had any issues with this one, not on the engine anyway, and that's where I figured I would have my most issues, is with the engine. Like I said, it takes a long time to pour this oil in, because you gotta go real slow. We'll put a gallon in it, and then we'll pull the dipstick and see where we're at. You know, I've told a lot of stories in my life, and I've been told that I should write a book, and maybe one day, but I thought on this channel I'd tell a story here and there. So while I'm pouring this oil, I'll tell you a story. My grandpa, he and I would sit on his front porch, and we would talk a lot, and we would talk about the old days, sawmilling, logging, things like that. And he would tell me this story about this man. I can't remember his name right now. My mom might know who it is, but this man would log with a horse, and that's how they used to do it back then. On the East Coast, that's where I'm at, it's the East Coast, they would have these little sawmills, and they would pull the sawmill into the woods and log the timber with horses, drag it a log at a time, 2 logs at a time to the sawmill, and they'd use the sawmill, saw it in the lumber, and then they'd load it on some kind of old truck and haul it to wherever they sold it at. Well, my grandpa's telling me this story about this man who was logging at one of these sawmills, logging with a horse, and said you could hear him coming long before you'd ever see him. And the way you'd hear him is he'd be singing. He'd be singing gospel hymns, Amazing Grace, you know, things like that. And you could never see him, you just hear him. And he said every once in a while, all of a sudden, he'd quit. He'd quit singing. And he would fly into cussing and beating and thrashing and carrying on something awful. And what had happened, he would be coming out the trail with those horses, and for some reason or another, you know, a lot of times these logs will roll or get hung on a stump or something. Something didn't go as planned, and man, he just flew off the handle. And he would be cussing and beating the horses and carrying on. Grandpa said you could hear them old horses neighing and carrying on something awful. And so he'd finally get it straightened out and get the log back up in the road and get the horses back straightened out and get to going. He said about 30 seconds he'd start singing Amazing Grace again. I heard that story many times. All right, we got one gallon in there. Let's pull the stick out, and it's probably not even on the stick yet. And this is another thing, this oil stick's in a bad place. It's hard to get to. No, we're not even on the stick yet. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna turn the recording off right now, instead of you watching me go through that again. And I'm gonna go ahead and fill it up, and when I get it full, we'll be back. Got 2 gallons of oil in it. It's reading full, but it's got to fill the filter up. I got to put the fuel filter back on it and the air filter, and then we'll crank it, let it warm up. Then we'll check it all again. There's always a hose in your way on this thing. Again, fuel filter, and just tighten it as tight as I can get it by hand. I like it when it's on tight and it ends up where the fuel filter number is where you can read it. But I've taken pictures of all these filters, and I have a file that I keep up with all that. Let's put the air filter in. All right, we got the oil in it, fuel filter back on it, air cleaner in it. First thing we're going to do, we're going to turn it on, and it's got an electric fuel pump on it that picks the fuel up and puts it to the high pressure pump. So it's got to fill that oil filter or fuel filter up. So we're going to turn it on. I'll take you over here, you can actually hear it. Hear that? And I can tell that that doesn't sound quite right, not what it usually does. And what it's doing, it's filling that fuel filter up. So we'll give it another few seconds, then we'll crank it. It may go dead, and if it does, that's fine. It'll crank right back up. This engine is a self-priming engine on this. I don't like to run my engines dry fuel. It's really hard on the injectors. I have done that a few times on this, but I try not to. But let's give it a whirl. Oh, it just changed sound. Let me take you back over and let you hear it. Hear how that's different? That's the way it's supposed to sound. So it filled that filter full. All right, let's give her a whirl. All right, the next issue I'm gonna fix has to do with this rail or channel, whatever you want to call it, that the energy chain rides in. And I don't know if you've caught it yet or not, but if you look right here, see how the paint's still on that? Believe it or not, the paint's still on that. But when you get down through here, see how it's been rubbing? And I mean, it's rubbed a sharp edge on it right there. And I know what's causing that. When you bring the head back, waiting for parts for the electrical stuff. When you bring the head back, this bar right here, it rides right on that channel. And what that's made to do is to knock off any kind of debris, you know, as the head comes down. If there's any debris laying on that right there, that bar, which is sticking out right there, it's made to come knock the debris off. And the other way around too. If the saw head's down here and you got a piece of debris laying there, as the saw head goes down, it's made to knock it off. Well, last summer I started developing hearing a squeak. Every time you pull the head from that end there back down to this end, right when it got to about right here somewhere, it would squeak. And I'm like, what is that? I couldn't find it. I thought it was in the chain. Well, I was here looking and studying, and I don't know if you can tell it by the phone. I don't think you can, so you're gonna have to take my word. This channel is joined right there. Four bolts right there. And you might be able to see it. The top of this channel is not running parallel with this channel. You can actually see it, I think. This channel is running high out here, which would make sense because when that bar comes across, it clears, squeak, 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 squeak. And that's where it's rubbing it. Now, what caused that. When I'm working on stuff, I not only try to fix things, but I try to figure out the cause of it. If you look back here, down at it, that thing is actually tilted just a hair up this way. That corner's actually up just a little bit. So I know what caused this, or I think I know what caused this. And before I tell you what caused it, I need to tell you the story behind it. So when I picked this sawmill up, and again, I'm not going to say anything about the dealership or call out anybody's names or anything like that, but it's not hard to figure out where I bought it from. I mean, obviously it come from Woodmizer, but it's not hard to figure out what dealership I got it from. When I got it home, I noticed something. I didn't know that it was going to cause this, but I did notice something. See that dent in that flange right there? What that is, that's where somebody took a forklift and put a tip of a fork against it here and was shoving the mill around, and the fork jabbed off of it that way. Well, then they put it right there again and did the same thing. When that happened, you know, this is welded down here. When that happened, it actually picked, I believe it picked the corner of this up a little bit, because what it's doing is trying to shorten the distance from here to up here. And I think it twisted it enough just to get it to where it starts to rubbing. Now, I called the dealership and I told them, I said, somebody's jabbed a fork into the front of my sawmill. And they were like, well, what do you mean? And I told them, well, finally, the same guy who told me that if I ever had an engine problem on this mill, not to bring it to him, he fessed up. And he said, well, he kind of fessed up. He said, yeah, I was moving that sawmill with the forklift with the ball, and it slipped off the ball, and it must have done that. Well, he told part of the truth. He was moving the forklift, but he wasn't moving it with a ball. I move this thing with a ball all the time. And you saw that in a video that I made. Put a ball on the end of a fork and move it all the time in the hitch. Never had a problem with it. He didn't put a ball on the fork. He put the fork against that. And what he was trying to do was slide the front of the sawmill around one way or another. It was in the way or some way or another. And more than likely, in order to bend that way, something got in a bind. The mill didn't want to move. So what he do? He pressed on the gas harder on the forklift. And he was pushing at it at a little bit of an angle, and he kept pushing and pushing, pushing, and wham. I mean, this thing right here where I'm putting my finger, it's almost cut in two. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can see that. He's pushing against that so hard he almost cut it in two. And then when it come off, he went up here and did it again. So, what would you call that? Misused the mill, mishandled the sawmill. I call it just plain downright rough. And if you're selling somebody a product, you shouldn't do that. Well, he knew about that. He knew about it. Nobody said a word about it. I called back down there. I took pictures of it, told him what happened. That's when he fessed up, and he said, well, I was moving it with the forklift with the ball, and it come off the ball. And I told him what happened. And they did call Woodmizer, and they got me a new bracket. Now, right here is the piece that's bent. And I've been waiting. I hadn't had time to put this bracket on. Like I said, I didn't think it posed any issue other than a cosmetic issue. Yeah, it looks bad. It made me mad. You know, I paid nearly $80,000 for this sawmill, and somebody's gouging it with a forklift. and then they don't even take the time to fix it before I pick it up. That really ticked me off right there. I understand accidents happen. I think that's very excessive, but I understand accidents happen all the time, and I'm not faulting somebody for that, but they knew, or he knew, that happened. He had to know that happened because he was pushing on it so hard, and when that fork come off of it, it had to make a heck of a noise. Because like if I'm pushing stuff around with my forklift here and it slips off, the forks make a really loud banging sound. So he knew that he did that. He just didn't want to say nothing about it. And so that issue, I believe, has caused this track. It lifted this bracket up, because when you push that, it's shortening. Sorry guys, it's shortening the distance here from this point to this point, which is going to make this pivot up, which brought that up. If you notice, the back, this is the front where it's wearing. The back is not wearing until right here, just a little bit, but it's just the paint may have flaked off there. It's not wearing anywhere. So I'm telling you all this story just to explain what happened, and I'm going to switch this bracket out now. Since I got the tongue off, it'd be a good time to do it. Now you can see a better side-by-side comparison. This one here, with all the dust on it, it's been up there in the junked up shed on the shelf. This is the new one right here. This is the one that just come off. That's how hard he pushed against it. Folks, it takes some pressure pushing against something to make a mark like that in it. Then come back here and do it again. And then bend that gusset. This is called a gusset in manufacturing. It's a brace. But let's check it this way. Well, I can't tell much that way. Well, I think my theory is absolutely correct on these brackets. If you look, I've got the new one here and the one that I just took off here. And I got them on the truck. If you look down there, I got them just as even as I can get them. And they're even up through here. The space in between them is really, really close. And the ends even line up. Now remember, the one in the front right here is the one I just took off. You see that? See how the one in the front is leaning to the left and the one in the back is leaning to the right? Well, the one in the back is correct. The one in the front is leaning to the left because this gusset is pushed in and it's drawing it that way, which made my mill rub that channel, or whatever you want to call that track, what the energy chain rides in, I guess is better terminology for it. But that's, you know, part of that's on me. I know it shouldn't have happened. I mean, it's a brand new sawmill. That shouldn't have never happened, and they should have fixed it. They should have drove somebody up here and fixed it themselves. It's brand new. And, you know, that would have been customer service. But, no, I got the part, and it's up to me to fix it. And, you know, I'm trying to make a living, and I went to sawing with it. And that's why I had time to fix it. Well, that's interesting. This is the nut that came off this bolt, and it goes in this hole here. They got, and this is exactly how I took it off. Lock nut, flat washer, that makes sense. Lock washer, flat washer, that don't make sense. It needs to be reversed. But they've got a lock washer on a bolt that's got a lock nut on it. But your lock washer should always go on first, because you want it to lock against the bolt head. Then your flat washer. Then another flat washer. Then the lock nut. That way it's locked on both sides. I don't think you really need that lock washer on there, but somebody did. I'll put it back on there. Sometimes you gotta have eyeballs on the end of your fingers. And right now mine's not working. It's a really tough place to get a nut on down here. I'm gonna have to change positions. Sounds like somebody's here. All right, guys, I believe that's going to solve the issue. I can already tell that track is running down just a little bit. I mean, I'll try to pan it with the camera so you can see, but it looks like it's running really nice and true right through here. The other thing that I noticed after I put that bracket on, right there where those two pieces of steel come together at those 4 bolts right here, do you see that gap in the steel right above the bolts? Yeah, that gap wasn't gapped up open that much at the top right there before it was actually touching. So that gap looks really consistent to me, which tells me that's the way it's supposed to be, which tells me that that has fixed that issue. So sorry you didn't see me bolting any more of it on. I heard somebody pull in the driveway, and I jumped on the golf cart and ran up there and see who it was. It was the trash man, making sure there wasn't somebody trying to rob me blind. But when I come back, I put that one bolt right there in. I forgot to turn the camera on, but it wasn't no big deal. It was just putting a bolt in a hole. We'll walk around, look at it from this viewpoint. That looks really true to me. So I think that's going to fix that issue. Well, folks, I've been doing some thinking. In one of the videos that you have watched, it was the video of where I was replacing all these grease fittings on the bed of the sawmill with these, they had these pressed in fittings, and I was replacing them with threaded in fittings. I had a moment to where I was having really difficulty getting the pin out, and I'll show you a little clip of that while I'm talking here. And finally it came out, and I took a little bit of time during the video at that point to tell a story about some things that happened to me, and I was getting a little bit spiritual about it. I'm a spiritual guy, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. I'm a sawmiller. I've worked for a retail company. I do construction work. I do land clearing, lot clearing. I do all kinds of stuff. But all of us are intended to be farmers. And I know there's a lot of people who just said, what? Let me explain. Depending on what your religion is, and I'm not trying to shove mine off on anyone, I'm just doing what I feel like I was called to do. I'm Christian, and being a Christian, Christ has asked us to spread the news, to spread His word. I think where a lot of people gets off topic is they try to shove His word on the people, and that pushes people away. I don't think that's what He intended at all. I think He intended us to plant the seed of His word, the seed of His love, the seed of His salvation. And then He will take that seed and make it grow into something in someone else. That's why I say we're all meant to be farmers. Farmers plant seeds, and I think that's what we're supposed to do too. Where I got to thinking about it was when I was growing up, there used to be this saying that everybody would say, like if you were a mean kid, or you've done something bad, or you know, you just disobeyed your parents, they used to say, well, boy, I'm gonna take you out behind the woodshed, which was basically saying you're getting ready to get a whipping. And so I got to thinking about that, and I thought, this might be an opportunity for me to be the farmer. So what I'm gonna start doing at the end of every one of my videos, and if you don't want to watch it, I'm totally good with that. I mean, if you want to watch the content of the video, and when it gets to this part, you're like, nope, that's not for me, that's your decision. But I'm going to start at the end of each one of my videos doing a segment, and what it's going to be is me talking maybe 5 minutes or something like that, maybe not even that long, depending on what's on my heart at that day. And it's going to be called Behind the Woodshed, or Behind the Shed. And that's going to be a point for me to just lay out what the good Lord is telling me to lay out, to spread His seed, and then just let it go from there. Someone somewhere may need to hear it. I know I have had times where I needed to hear something, and somebody on a video or something said it, and I can't discount that that's not God talking. So you're going to see that coming up in videos. The only issue with that is behind my shed right now, it's a mud hole. So I'll probably just do it for the time being, standing right here at the front of the shed. Even though it's going to be called Behind the Shed, I'll be standing here in front of the shed. But as time goes on, I will fix it to where I'm actually behind the shed, doing the whatever you want to call it, the talking, the thought process, whatever, make no difference. But it will eventually be behind the shed. So folks, with that said, thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope everyone is well. Hit the like button, thumbs up, subscribe please, and also share the channel. If this segment I'm talking about, Behind the Shed, if it speaks to you, share it, because someone out there needs to hear it too, more than likely. And I'm not a preacher. I don't want to be called a preacher. I'm a farmer planting God's seeds. Hope y'all have a great day, and remember, get out and go fix something.